When I left the grueling intensity of boot camp and found myself heading towards the humid embrace of Okinawa in the heart of the summer of '67, before setting foot in Vietnam, my rank was Lance Corporal in the U.S. Marines. My mind was a whirlwind of anticipation and uncertainty, grappling with the blend of second-hand tales and personal expectations. Okinawa, or Oki as we often called it, buzzed with the echoes of tales from the jungles of Vietnam, tales that sent shivers down my spine. Yet somehow I clung to a naive confidence, a blend of youthful ignorance and brotherhood solidarity. My initial days on the island were confined to the base, a common practice for newcomers to keep us out of trouble. It wasn't until my first pass that I got a taste of the local nightlife. One of the seasoned Marines took us, the fresh-faced bunch, to a cozy bar where the atmosphere was engineered to make us forget the world outside. The girls there were professionals in more ways than one, their smiles as practiced as their conversation, and the cooks, well, they knew their way around a kitchen. This isn't the crux of my story, but rather a background to the scene that was unfolding. We indulged in sake, letting the liquor loosen our tongues and our inhibitions. I remember foolishly thinking this might just be the norm of my deployment, a dangerous thought. It was during my second outing, a few days later, that I noticed something peculiar. The higher priesthood women at the bar were distinct in their flawless skin and fluent English, a stark contrast to the others who bore the marks of harder lives. That night, I made the choice to spend it with one of these women, leading to a dream so vivid it felt more real than reality, a stroll through snow-capped landscapes with her by my side. Waking up in the bleak barracks, with no recollection of my return, was a jarring contrast. I brushed it off as the aftermath of too much alcohol. However, our sudden halt in deployment due to our company commander falling gravely ill added an unexpected twist to our stay in Okinawa. I found myself frequenting the bar more, sometimes for the company, other times just for the cheap whiskey and cigarettes. On my fourth visit, a curious incident involving a friend occurred, and I questioned one of the girls about the absence of local Japanese men in the bar. Her evasive response only added to the mystery. That night, the bar was alive with the boisterous energy of GIs looking to escape the weight of their responsibilities. Jameson, with his robust Irish-American heritage and Boston accent, was the life of the party, while Eddie and I soaked in his larger-than-life stories. The night blurred into a haze of laughter, warm beer, and the allure of the women circulating among us. It was then I noticed her, the woman who was slowly becoming more than just another face in the crowd. Eddie and Jameson succumbed to the charms of the company, leaving me alone with her. What followed was a pattern now familiar: drinks, an exchange of money, and a stumble to a private room upstairs, my drunken state overpowering any resistance. The morning brought the same confusion, a blank memory, and a hangover that I nursed with coffee at breakfast. But it was Jameson's absence that struck a chord of worry, his belongings untouched, his presence unaccounted for. I brushed off my concern, thinking he might have scored a pass or spent the night elsewhere. Yet deep down, a sense of unease began to take root, a prelude to the inexplicable events that were to unfold in the days to come. Eddie and I, shouldering our regular duties, delved into the day's work with the logistics team, loading and unloading trucks under the sweltering Okinawa sun. Throughout the morning, the absence of Jameson lingered in my mind, an unspoken question mark. As lunchtime came and went without any sign of him, I felt it was time to raise the matter with our superiors. Finding our lieutenant in his office, I broached the subject of Jameson's unusual disappearance. He consulted the logbook, revealing that Jameson had been granted a 2-day pass. This revelation seemed to explain his absence, settling the unease that had started to build within me. That evening, as a group of us Marines queued up outside our usual haunt, a sense of foreboding inexplicably washed over me. I felt eyes boring into me and scanning the crowd, my gaze locked with a man standing at the mouth of a dimly lit alley. His attire was unmistakably that of the Japanese military. His intense stare compelled me, and with a sense of curiosity mingled with caution, I made my way towards him, leaving my comrades behind. Approaching the stranger, I offered a cigarette, an olive branch of sorts. He accepted it and gestured for me to follow him down the alley. We arrived at a nondescript metal door leading into what appeared to be a local eatery. The aromas of fish and rice enveloped us as we entered the kitchen, cluttered with signs of frequent use. He motioned for me to sit at a small table, disappearing momentarily before returning with 2 beers. As we sat across from each other, I took in his appearance, young, like me, but with a hardened look that spoke of experiences far beyond my own. His question about my visits to the club caught me off guard, especially delivered in such fluent English. I admitted to my frequent visits, trying to maintain a casual air. His next question struck a nerve. "Have any of your friends gone missing yet?" The mention of missing friends instantly brought Jameson to mind, intensifying the unease that had been simmering inside me. The stranger's warning to be cautious resonated deeply as he ushered me out. Rejoining Eddie outside the club, I couldn't shake off the feeling of paranoia the encounter had instilled in me. As we settled into our now customary booth, I found myself scanning the room for familiar faces, seeking comfort in the presence of my comrades. The night began to lose its edge as more of our group gathered, but the atmosphere changed when Jameson descended from the upstairs rooms. He joined us, engaging in the usual camaraderie, yet there was something unsettlingly off about him. His usual jovial demeanor felt strained, almost rehearsed, heightening the sense of unease that had been growing within me since my encounter with the Japanese soldier. The night's events had sown seeds of doubt and suspicion, leaving me to wonder about the true nature of the place we had come to view as a refuge from the realities of our deployment. Jameson's behavior that night was like a poorly tuned radio, his usually boisterous self now coming across as forced and unconvincing. Amidst the odd atmosphere of the evening, I took him aside, offering a cigarette as a pretext to ask him directly what was going on. His reaction to my question was a mixture of surprise and guilt, as if I had caught him red-handed. He hastily brushed off his peculiar demeanor, attributing it to being hungover and tired. I wasn't fully convinced, but I chose not to press further. Back inside the club, I noticed Eddie had vanished, apparently lured away by one of the more expensive girls at the bar. This would have been a typical occurrence, but recalling the warning from the Japanese soldier earlier, a sense of unease gnawed at me. That night, I abstained from drinking too much and managed to hitch a ride back to the base with some of the guys, despite their questionable sobriety. My mind was preoccupied with concerns for my friends and a hope that we would soon leave the island. The next morning, we were greeted with the grim news that our commander's condition had worsened. There were murmurs about needing more troops in the jungle, yet Jameson's absence from work, especially after his pass had expired, was becoming conspicuous. Eddie and I covered for him during roll call, but our lieutenant had already noticed his absence and questioned me about it. I downplayed it, suggesting Jameson was probably sleeping off a hangover. The lieutenant seemed to accept this but insisted on speaking with Jameson as soon as possible and revoked his off-base privileges. Despite my growing concerns, I found myself drawn back to the bar earlier than usual, partly due to an early release from work and partly out of a need to locate Jameson. Eddie accompanied me, and we found Jameson already there, looking as if he hadn't left since the night before. His appearance was alarming. He seemed even more unwell than the previous day. When I commented on his condition, he casually mentioned feeling unwell and coughed into a cloth, revealing alarming red stains. I wanted to ask why he hadn't sought medical attention earlier, but I understood the stubborn pride that often came with being a Marine. We decided it was best not to let him return to the base alone, so we arranged for a cab, a local honcho, to take him to see a corpsman. As we left the bar, I couldn't help but glance towards the alley where I had met the Japanese soldier, now deserted in the early hours. Jameson's health decline and mysterious absences had me deeply unsettled. Was this related to the soldier's warning? I wondered if Jameson had been poisoned, a theory that seemed plausible given his abrasive nature when drunk and the locals' strained tolerance of our presence. I knew I needed to find that Japanese soldier again, to unearth the truth behind these alarming events. Since the honcho couldn't enter the base, we walked from the front gate to the medical facility. Eddie volunteered to accompany Jameson, leaving me to spend the rest of my evening in contemplative solitude, writing letters, my mind swirling with questions and a growing sense of dread about the true nature of what was happening to us on this foreign soil. That night, after the unsettling day's events, I found myself surprisingly able to sleep soundly. For the first time since my encounters with the captivating local girl at the club, I didn't dream about her. In fact, I couldn't recall dreaming at all, a stark contrast to the vivid dreams that had been haunting my nights. Waking up the next day, I felt a peculiar sluggishness, not quite sickness, but as if my energy had been sapped away as soon as I opened my eyes. At morning formation, names were called for deployment to Da Nang. Neither Eddie's nor mine was among them. After the formation, I asked Eddie to cover for me and made my way to the medical unit, driven by concern for Jameson. To my dismay, I found that he had checked himself out in the middle of the night, leaving his IV and any form of notice behind. The corpsman assumed he had returned to his barracks for comfort, but a quick check confirmed he wasn't there. I turned to the front gate to investigate further, scouring the logbook. We had signed him in the previous night, but there was no record of him leaving the base, especially without a renewed Liberty Pass. The idea of him sneaking off base, especially in his weakened state, was troubling. The allure of the club's girls was strong, but it didn't seem plausible given his condition. Once I had the chance, I left the base, heading for the club. Opting to go alone, I stopped by the squad bay to fetch a personal pistol, a precaution advised by a fellow Marine, despite the risk of court-martial for carrying it off base. I felt a deep need for that extra security. The club was nearly empty when I arrived, early as it was. Jameson was nowhere to be seen, and the staff were unhelpful. Feeling at a loss, I found myself drawn back to the alley where I had met the Japanese soldier. The door was locked, so I attempted to find another way around. As I turned, I almost collided with the soldier himself, appearing silently behind me. He apologized for startling me and knocked on the kitchen door, calling out in Japanese. An old man in a suit answered, eyeing us with mild curiosity before stepping aside. The soldier led me to a private booth in the dining area, where we made small talk while waiting for our beers. His English, devoid of any accent, surprised me once again. I decided to be straightforward and shared my concerns about Jameson. His reaction was immediate, from relaxed to defensive, anxious, and slightly angered. When I mentioned my suspicions about potential poisoning at the club, his demeanor shifted subtly. He remained silent, his expression a complex mix of emotions, as if he was wrestling with a decision about how much to reveal. The tension in the air was palpable, and I braced myself for whatever revelations were about to unfold, knowing that they might change everything I thought I knew about our time in Okinawa. With the conversation gradually opening up, we ordered a few more beers. The man introduced himself as Brian. He had spent much of his youth in the United States, which explained his fluency in English and his American name. As the beers took effect, and he seemed more at ease, I decided to delve deeper into his theories about the club. Brian hesitantly shared his suspicion that the people running the club might be involved in something sinister, possibly even killing or enslaving those who disappeared. His apprehension was palpable, and I realized the gravity of what he was sharing with me. His fear of disappearing himself was evident. I offered to investigate the club that night, and after some initial resistance, Brian agreed. He revealed that the place belonged to his father and advised me to use his name if I encountered any problems with the staff, suggesting I avoid entering through the front door in the future. We parted ways, and I found myself back in the bustling atmosphere of the club, hoping to find Jameson. I saw Jameson's usual companion at the bar, but she hadn't seen him either. I took a seat at the bar for a better view, half listening to a fellow Marine who had joined me, my mind racing with thoughts of how to start my investigation. Before long, the familiar presence of the woman I had dreamt about pressed against me, momentarily distracting me from my purpose. Despite my resolve, I was drawn in by her allure, eventually agreeing to rent a room for the night. After our encounter, I pretended to sleep, waiting until I was certain she was deeply asleep. I then quietly dressed and rummaged through her belongings in the bathroom, but found nothing incriminating. Returning to the club, now nearly empty, I observed the lone bartender and a couple of cooks engaged in a card game. Seizing an opportunity when the bartender left, I slipped into the kitchen. A quick search revealed nothing unusual, and the freezer, while eerie with its hanging meat, didn't seem to hide any secrets. As I contemplated abandoning my search for the night, a partially open door caught my eye, leading to what appeared to be a root cellar. Driven by a mix of apprehension and curiosity, I descended the staircase into the cellar, the smell of damp earth and unfamiliar spices growing stronger. As I reached the bottom, I attempted to light my Zippo in the darkness. It was then that I heard something, a sound that made my blood run cold. I strained to hear, my senses heightened in the pitch-black underground, knowing that I might be on the verge of uncovering something far more sinister than I had anticipated. The sound that reached my ears in the darkness of the cellar was chilling, a muffled scream, distant yet unmistakable. My heart raced as I traced the sound to a trapdoor in the back wall of the cellar. It was ajar, inviting yet menacing. In that moment, I was more scared than I had ever been in my life. I stood there, caught between the instinct to flee and the compelling need to discover the source of the screams. Finally, my resolve overcame my fear, and I descended through the trapdoor, dropping about 6 feet into an area that was clearly recently excavated, the smell of fresh earth overpowering. The thought crossed my mind that I was thankful not to have been a tunnel rat in Vietnam. The stories I had heard from those returning from the front lines were harrowing enough. As I moved cautiously through the tunnel, I feared I might stumble upon something akin to those nightmarish tales, maybe Viet Cong operatives in Okinawa or Japanese soldiers from a war long past. The scream echoed again, this time unmistakably a man's, filled with agony. It was a sound that would become all too familiar to me in the days to come in Vietnam, but at that moment it was surreal and horrifying. I slowly made my way down the dirt tunnel, expecting the worst, my pistol drawn and ready. When I heard the scream again, much closer now, I saw lights strung along the tunnel. This part of the tunnel seemed ancient, likely used by the Japanese during the war. Between the screams, I heard sobs and recognized the voice. It was Jameson, pleading for his life. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. I knew he needed help, but I also knew I had to be cautious. Approaching another entrance to a room off the tunnel, I prepared myself for a confrontation. Peering through the doorway, I was met with a sight that still haunts me to this day. Jameson was strapped to a table, his face unrecognizable, torn apart and covered in blood. The creature in the room with him was like nothing I had ever seen, a fox, but standing upright on hind legs, with multiple tails. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. Without hesitation, I opened fire on the creature. My first shot hit its shoulder, but it didn't go down. As it turned towards me with a growl, I fired 3 more shots. One missed, but another hit its ribs, causing it to yelp in pain. As it dropped to a knee and then charged, I managed to fire 2 more rounds into its stomach. The creature knocked the gun from my hand, but I narrowly avoided its claws. I found myself in a life-and-death struggle with this nightmarish beast, desperately fighting to save not only my own life, but also to put an end to the horror that had befallen my friend and squad mate. The reality of what was happening was almost too much to comprehend, yet there I was, face to face with something out of legend, in a fight for survival.